Why doesn't the church use the state for its own mission? In the last section of this video essay, we are aware of one crucial fact, that beyond Constantine and the medieval church, Christianity has always been tempted to ally itself with the temporal powers. The temptation of Constantinianism is still alive today. It remains a real factor across the political spectrum, which includes the conservative and the progressive sectors alike, with its nuances and specificities, of course. But in a chaotic and complex time like our own, isn't it a good idea for the state and the church to join forces in order to work together for a more Christian society? Historically, both the church at the institutional level and the believers at the individual level have often been jealous of how the state can carry out its claims and goals, usually through the quote, legitimate use of violence. Christianity, post-Constantine, has been tempted repeatedly to see the contemporary governmental structures and other forms of power, whether it be political, economic, or cultural, as potential allies. This Christian view considers the world to be a place that must be contested or fought over in order to achieve self-preservation and again turn society from the top down into something that more or less resembles the kingdom of God. Christians have in many regards made these alliances, which often have little to do with Christ and the kingdom of God, but turn to be useful to win battles of meaning or to gain positions of power. Except for some radical movements, the church has frequently wanted to guarantee a social order inspired by Christian values, from and by the power of the state. However, this is quite a questionable methodology in light of the Bible and history. The early church's testimony is a defiant example of opposition to a Christianity captive to the state's tools and forms of legitimization. The first Christians did not think that justice could come, first of all, from the hands of those in power in their world. They never held that Caiaphas, Herod, or Caesar could be the primary agents of transformation in their culture. Nor did they think that true justice would begin when other people, or Christians, occupied the palaces of Caiaphas, Herod, or Caesar for that matter. Perhaps these changes would be advantageous in some cases in softening injustice and oppression. This is not to discount that many structures of domination can be replaced by better or more just ones. However, changes are not radical if they do not deal with the root problem. By not dealing with the problem's roots, new forms of oppression will continue to emerge. Or in the words of Arturo Piedra, social transformations have short paths without new men and women to manage them. In the New Testament, there are plenty of examples of how the first Christians saw the state. They did not see it as a mere space for the dispute of power, but instead as a system that competed directly with God and that often assumed the category of a rival God. Let's take a look at a few examples. First, the New Testament clarifies that it was the temporal powers, both governmental and religious, who were directly responsible for the death of Jesus. You can see this clearly in Acts 4, verses 26 and 27, or in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 8. Second, the claim that the devil himself is the one who has the power over the kingdoms of this world is evident in the New Testament text. In the climactic scene of the temptation of Jesus in Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 7, the devil says, "To you I give their glory and all this authority, for it has been given over to me, and I give it to anyone I please." The cost that must be paid to enjoy so much power is, quite simply, to adore the devil. Third, an even more explicit of an example can be found in the symbolism in the book of Revelation, which speaks of the great dragon who was thrown down, that ancient serpent which is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, from Revelation 12, verse 9. This same dragon is the one who gives power and his throne and great authority to the beast, who symbolizes the Roman Empire, from Revelation 13:2. The fourth and final example, even though there are many more, can be seen in the eschatological call of Revelation 18:4. In a scene reminiscent to the Exodus of Israel, God says to believers regarding Babylon, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins." In the Old Testament, we find figures such as Joseph, Daniel, or Esther, who developed a spiritual mission within the power of the state. These are often examples used by churches to talk about how believers should access or participate with the temporal power. But it is interesting to discover that we do not find anything like these cases in the New Testament. It is even more striking that a work written in the 3rd century, often attributed to Hippolytus of Rome, explicitly states that anyone who wields the power of the sword, or the magistrate of the city who dresses in purple, they should resign or be thrown out from the Christian community. Historical research suggests that high-level political officials, that is, those who wield the power of the sword, or magistrates who wear purple, were viewed, at least by much of the early church, as being incompatible with the Christian faith. The Protestant Reformation tried to recover meanings and practices from the early church that had been disfigured and changed during the Middle Ages. Although we can recognize the importance of the magisterial Reformation led by Luther, there were some crucial problems embedded in this tradition. The Anabaptists and other radical groups of the Reformation perceived that Luther had not gone far enough in his reforms. These radical groups denounced the seeming confusion, both in Catholic and Protestant circles, between the church and the civil government. The Anabaptists insisted on the New Testament message by affirming that the church is a community chosen from out of the world. This community was now on an exodus towards the reign of Christ. The alliance with the temporal powers, or with the full identification of the church with the government, was for them a betrayal of the gospel message. A critique launched especially at Lutherans in Germany, who had gained many political and economic benefits from their alliance with the local princes and lords. It is not surprising then that the positions of the Anabaptists sounded as radically subversive to both the imperial-leaning Catholics and princely-leaning Protestants, and that both groups decided to persecute and even martyr the Anabaptists, who questioned the role of the state and the church. The supposed Christianization of society can only be obtained through compromise. At first, the benefits sound very tempting and seem like the necessary help that the church needs to not lose the battle against evil forces. But this privilege always comes with consequences. Often, the result of this alliance is the disintegration of a gospel which is alternative. The church then becomes the legitimizer of the status quo and has no choice but to contribute to state idolatry. All powers, be they political, economic, or cultural, ask for our allegiance and oaths of fidelity. We are asked to celebrate their flags and symbols and build all kinds of altars that demand always some type of sacrifice. Sooner or later, the alliance between church and state is doomed to pervert the message of Jesus and the movement's identity. We are now close to finishing this theological, historical, and biblical journey. After everything we've learned, we must ask ourselves, specifically, what does this mean for us? Of course, the specific answer to that question can only be answered by you. But I still have some ideas coming soon, and I'm going to save them for the last section. But before we end this episode, I ask you, should the church put its energy into proclaiming and making official Christian values? How do you feel about the critical attitudes that the New Testament has towards temporal powers? How can we relate all these ideas to believers' political commitments and their involvement in current issues? These are some questions to think about for now. Thanks for watching this episode, and make sure to catch the next one.